Greetings. My name is Irfan Nuruddin. I am the Senior Director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council, a think tank in Washington, D.C., and professor in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Over the last few years, debates around the legality, the legitimacy, and the practicality of allowing overseas South Asians to vote in their national elections back home have gathered steam. These debates are invariably politicized and political, as they should be, because after all, elections are nothing if not political. But what is often missed in those conversations are the logistics of running elections when you have diasporas that live all around the world. Of course, South Asia is not the only part of the world to have debated these questions, and there are countries that have successfully implemented overseas voting procedures for their citizens who happen to be abroad. To help us understand what we can learn from the experiences of countries that have done overseas voting, we are really honored today to have a renowned expert in that topic join us. Mr. Patricio Belados is an international electoral consultant based in Mexico City. He has over 20 years' experience in the fields of election management and electoral justice. He has advised numerous Latin American countries regarding election reform, and has contributed to as an expert on election observation missions in Peru, Ecuador, El Salvador, Panama, and the United States of America. Mr. Belados was responsible for designing and implementing Mexico's first overseas electoral process in 2006. Since then, he has conducted academic research and international consulting in the political rights of diasporas and the implementation of voting procedures for absentee voting. Mr. Belados serves as a member of the editorial committee of Mexico's leading electoral publication. He publishes op-eds on this field on a regular basis and is currently teaching courses on election law in his native Mexico. Patricio, it's a real pleasure to have you join us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invite, Mr. Nordin.
Yes, and you may call me Irfan if you'd like. So let me start really by asking you to shed light on this broader conversation about overseas voting. As I mentioned in the introduction, you have really remarkable long-term experience in this, including that 2006 effort in what must have seemed like quite an experiment in democratic reform to allow Mexicans abroad to vote. What have been the big lessons? How would you assess the success of overseas voting for Mexico? And then we'll get into the weeds of some of the more practical considerations.
Very well. Yes, Irfan. I think overseas voting, well, it's been conducted for more than a century now. Australia started in the early 1900s. And this has been a part of a wave of recognition of political rights. Most countries recognize first the right of women to vote, then the right of youth to vote, and then we go to migrants in the countries, especially Southeast Asia, Latin America, where an important part of the population has migrated mainly for economical reasons, but also for political or war, etc. In Mexico, when we ended, and as you told me not to get into it, I won't get into the political side, but after we ended and everybody agreed that there was a universal, a human right to political participation, even though you're not in the country, you don't reside in the country, then the challenge was how we go about it. And in Mexico, as in the rest of the countries, I think what we need to answer is basically three questions. Who can vote? For what positions can you vote? And how do you vote? And there's a menu of different choices or methods regarding each question that could lead to a tailor-based solution, because of course, in elections, there is no universal best practice or best method, as already proven by history and academia.
So just to ground this conversation, maybe we can just, for many of our audience and myself included, we might be ignorant on the state of the art, even in a particular country. So for Mexico right now, what are the answers to those three questions? Who can vote, for what can they vote, and how do they vote?
Right. In Mexico, since we have the double nationality, you can have double nationality, and having double nationality means that you can participate in politically in both countries if you have a different nationality and or citizenship. So anybody who is Mexican, who is any person that was born in Mexico or is the son or daughter of a Mexican national is eligible to vote. And what we need is a second test, that you have to be registered in the electoral roll, that you can do it either in Mexico or abroad or overseas.
And they can vote for any office for which elections are held.
That is in Mexico, we started just for the presidential election. Later, we added the local governance or the provincial governors in the executive. And after that, we added the Senate, the upper chamber, on the federal legislature. So we have that. That it's quite, I think, it's not too logical for the Mexican case, because what really you would need to do, I think, is first of all, you should elect the lower chamber, which is a chamber that approves the budget, and it's the chamber that it's more has a better relationship with the actual people, the population, because as we know, the upper chamber is it's more a political chamber, because it represents the different provinces or states. And secondly, I would think that especially in countries where the migration is due to economic causes, and there are high level of remittances back home, it seems natural that people overseas can elect municipal governments, because those are the governments that are taking the money they're sending and doing a basic infrastructure or deliveries of public goods.
So when I think, I mean, as much as I want to really keep your expertise on the debates around how we implement this, right? The real practical considerations, and I've got a number of questions. Maybe we should think a little bit about the politics over here. And I think about that in the context of 2022, where globally we remark about a moment of democratic backsliding. There's lots of questions about electoral integrity. Every election, it seems, is contested with claims about fraud. We're watching in real time, the election that have just concluded in Kenya, and debates around sort of what has happened over there. For instance, Latin America is no exception to those, and of course the United States is not as well. I could imagine that overseas voting brings its own set of challenges in terms of integrity, of making sure that people don't wonder about votes cast by people who live far away being counted in the same way, etc. So has that been a debate in Mexico of sort of the legitimacy, in a sense, of overseas voting? I love the principle of universal right to political participation, but I can also imagine that has created some debates around, does someone who has another citizenship have the same rights as someone who's only a Mexican citizen? I could imagine there are some debates about how do we trust election voting machines that are held in a consulate that is run by the incumbent government, as it were. So has any of that been, or has that actually kind of become pretty normalized as people have gotten more experienced with it?
Well, I would answer firstly with an anecdote. In 2005, when the Mexican Congress was introducing the bill and voting on it, one of the members of Congress said, we should not and we cannot accept for overseas voting to be easier than the voting in the country because we live here and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there is this reaction. Of course, in order for overseas voting to gain ground and be part of a democracy, we have to take into account that we cannot, I would not advise any country to provide for rules that will not feel every political party and the citizenship secure about the integrity of the voting procedure. We have to take into account, and if that restricts the right to vote in some ways, well, then be it, because I think the first key for it to be, because you can have different projects, very short lasting, but in order for it to be really taken into account as a permanent right, you have to provide for that, and especially the method of voting, well, answers this thing. When, as you said, if you have no trust in your diplomacy, in your embassy, in your consulate, and in the country, people think that they will work for the ruling party, then you cannot have a method that provides for voting in consulates or embassies. For example, if you have undocumented population, it's very difficult to have it in embassies or consulates because there's the risk for, the law enforcement, police or military or whatever to go to the consulates and arrest the people that are undocumented. That goes for it. Also, in practical terms, do you have a trustworthy postal system? Then voting by mail can work. If you don't, and it's part of the government, then it doesn't work, and etc. etc. But really, I think, Irfan, that it's very important to have this assurance of electoral integrity in overseas, and to not ask for it to be more than it is in your country, because that is also quite absurd to ask for it to be the purest form of voting overseas, and in the country you can just go there and have, take a ballot and cross it out.
That makes a lot of sense. So in a sense, if we start with that first principle of you have the right to vote, then you have the same, it should feel the same as if you were voting at home, right? In a sense.
Right.
The undocumented question raises some broader questions of access, and we struggle with this even in local elections. We know that in certain parts of even Washington, D.C., where I live, election lines are longer in poorer neighborhoods, and across the country in the United States, we are seeing this where unequal access to polling stations, different lines, a length of lines, more likely to have breakdowns, etc. In the context of the South Asian diaspora, one of the points that has been often raised is that it is a very large and very diverse diaspora, right? I mean, there are South Asians really across the globe who have made productive lives in other countries other than those that they were born in, but they also represent very different strata of society: highly educated, very low educated, labor class, white collar workers, and everything in between. In that sense, like any diaspora, it's a very diverse diaspora. Overseas voting has been accused by some critics as really reflecting a pretty upper class elite bias, right? Really the desire of more educated middle class or upper middle class diaspora to have a say in what goes on at home, without taking into full consideration sort of the interests of maybe people who are poorer, who have less education, less information, might in fact be more likely to be undocumented, etc. How do we think about those accessibility and equality issues? What has become the best practices in the international election community for overseas voting, so that we're not just focused on people living in New York City or in Washington, D.C., but in fact thinking about South Asian diaspora that's in parts of Africa, parts of the Middle East, indeed in South America as well, all of that.
Yeah, I would think, Irfan, that you have to provide a method that would work for any sort of migration. In the Mexican case, for example, in which you have a high percent of undocumented Mexicans residing abroad, especially in the US, well, you have to take into account that undocumented Mexicans residing in the US do not want to be very loud or very visible. They prefer to be, well, just under the radar, actually. So you have to provide for a type of vote that can be done by that. And let me give you an example of what not to do. In the first overseas voting in Mexico in 2006, what Congress was then again discussing, and they said, well, we need to do it by, it was a postal vote, we need to do it by postal vote, and they said, well, we need to strengthen the integrity of the vote, so we're going to have a registered vote. Well, that's excellent, everybody said, yes, that will give us a lot more security. The only thing that we didn't realize is that if you want to send a registered mail in the US, you have to go to a postal office, which is a federal building with federal policemen outside guarding it. And that was very challenging for people to actually go to a post office and send their ballot. After that, we changed that, but those are the things you have to take into account. Also, of course, any vote can be, it's more likely that people, white collar workers or diplomats or et cetera, will participate. In Mexico, we had the first time voting from, I think, more than 150 countries. And what were the votes? Probably diplomats, teachers, entrepreneurs, et cetera. Those are the people which voted in all of those countries. While in the US, you had actually more of a blue collar voting. So it really, you need to do, and I think, and one of the lessons, Irfan, I think, is that you can provide for different methods. You don't have to marry with one method. You don't have to marry with postal or internet or embassy. You can actually try different things that can work for different types of people. And in the US, you can vote in person, you can vote by mail, you can vote in your house if you, I mean, that's that. So why not do it why not do it with the overseas population?
Yeah, though of course that's absolutely right, and that's such a profound point. And yet we're also reminded that that's become so politicized in the United States, as people are actively in large parts of the country now taking away the ability to vote by mail, to vote absentee, and raising these sorts of legitimacy questions, I think unfairly and cynically, but nonetheless in ways that create some real challenges. I do have two final questions for you. One of the big debates, of course, is this presumption that at a particular moment in time that the diaspora vote, right, this monolith of the diaspora vote, is likely to be to the benefit of a particular political party, right? And so, the one party thinks that they're going to benefit and the other party is worried that they'll lose. And so that becomes part of the debate. From the empirical record, though, is that validated? I mean, do we find that over time, the diaspora tends to be more likely to split in favor of a particular party, or is the same kind of diversity that we would expect domestically reflected internationally among the citizens or the eligible voters for a particular country?
Right. I would think, Irfan, I don't know the South Asian record very much, but I could talk to you about the Latin American record. And what you would have is not monoliths regarding political parties, but I would think there's a tendency for parties in power to be less voted than the opposition, because usually people live because the party in power is not giving just the tools for them to stay and have a job and et cetera, et cetera. So it usually goes to the opposition. Now, it depends also what you need to know. And let me, I know we don't have much time, but one of the keys, I think, and now in the 21st century, we can do it, is actually why do we have a vote at all? We have to give information to the overseas population in order for them to decide who to vote for. And that's, I think, very important. And a lot of countries don't give that information. You cannot have campaigns outside the country or etc. That is, I think, if you don't think about your vote, if you don't have enough information to decide which is your best choice, I mean, there's really it's really hard for you to defend the actual political participation. Now with internet and Instagram and TikTok and whatever, it's easier for you to do that, and that is, I think, just a requirement. You have to have an educated, a recent vote, and if you vote for the party in power or the opposition, then that's relatively unimportant, because that will change over time. That is what we need to convince, especially political parties in power, that it's going to go up and down. Don't worry about it. You'll probably not get some votes this time, but then you can get them the next time.
Now, that's a lovely point, that if we treat these as just individuals who have a right to vote, and then they need access to information, and then they can cast informed votes, and informed voters don't act as monoliths, right? They have diverse opinions on different issues. I'm also struck, really just by the value that you keep coming back to, that if we start with the individual citizen, this seems pretty clear that there is no legitimate reason in which in the 21st century, in 2022, that they should be denied the chance to vote, because that is part of their rights as citizens, because we have the technology. You mentioned TikTok and Instagram as ways to get information, and obviously we have just made tremendous advances in voting machines, electronic voting machines and other things. So in many ways, the pragmatic considerations that might have existed 100 years ago, or even 25 years ago, are less barriers today. So that's a really nice point. Can I ask you a final question then? Let's switch now to what we have learned from your experience over the last 20 years in working in this field from citizens. Does providing overseas voting create a tighter bond? Do we see more return migration, for instance? Do we see greater remittances from overseas voters? Do we see a greater, loyalty, affinity, because they're connected to the political process over here? So if we're thinking about this as really empowering citizens who for a long time may have not had the vote, what are the knock-on effects of that?
That's a very good question, Irfan. I would think it does. One thing that we have to also take into account through the study of different overseas voting cases is that this is not a massive vote. If you put in the agenda that you're going to have the participation, let's say a country has a normal turnout of 50%, you're going to have 50% overseas or 25% overseas, you're selling something that will not happen. This is not a tumultuous exercise. It's an exercise that has just enough participation for you to take into account the needs of people over in any country. Secondly, you have normally personal relationships that go on now easier. You have WhatsApp groups and video calls and whatever. And that goes on normally. Secondly, you have mainly economical relationships in which the remittances and that also that had been like kind of the voting abroad for many countries. If you send some money to your family, then you can have a say in what they're going to do and how they're going to vote over there. That happens a lot, and that's voting economically type of thing. But politically, I would think that the first good lesson from political participation is that you renew the political arena. Countries tend to have the same persons that left the country join and do the political parties overseas or the groups overseas, and this grows old very fast. Normally, young people weren't in this political party A or B or in this part of society or the next. Actually, political participation and engagement renews how the political ties between overseas citizens and their origin, their country of origin, and of course, if you, apart from having the right to vote, you have methods for there to be a special seat or seats for the migrants to be represented, like Italy does, or Colombia, or etc. Dozens of countries have not only the right to vote, but the right to be voted, and they have a special just circumscription in which those people are represented. That actually makes the turnout go a bit more up, because you also know that somebody's going to represent you, and they're going to, well, take away the taxes for the money that you're sending home, or you're going to be able to, I don't know, try to make a passport in your embassy or anything that would help you as an overseas citizen.
I love that point, and thank you so much for making it so eloquently at the end. I could talk to you for a lot longer than we have time for, but let me just conclude by thanking you, Patricio, for the time this morning, for sharing your expertise with us. And to those watching this, the debates around overseas voting in South Asia should in many ways be reinterpreted in light of Mr. Bayados's commentary as being fundamental human rights for citizens, in the same way that every citizen in a democratic society expects to be able to vote. That right does not vanish simply because you've chosen legally to leave your country and move somewhere else. And so ensuring that right is a reaffirmment of our commitment to democracy and to people's right to choose the leaders of the societies in which they're eligible to vote. We live at a very unique moment in democratic history where we have more technology than ever before to enable these things to happen. What we need is the political will to see beyond partisan advantage and really think of this as being supporting democracy in the way that our guest today has illustrated. A couple of weeks ago, we hosted an in-person panel at the Atlantic Council focused on the debate around overseas voting for Pakistan. We invite you to watch that video as well. It is available at the Atlantic Council South Asia Center page and on the Atlantic Council's YouTube page as well. This is an ongoing conversation for the South Asia Center to think about how to support debates around overseas voting in the region in a constructive and technical and technocratic manner. And to that end, once again, join me in thanking our guest, Mr. Patricio Bayados, renowned expert on overseas voting, joining us today from Mexico City. Thank you all.
Thank you, Irfan.